Hi everyone, how are you? I hope everyone is okay. Welcome back to American Cultural Myth series. So, in this first episode, if you remember about this series, we explored one of the biggest questions in American culture. Does the American dream still exist? Through the Great Gatsby, we talked about success, wealth, class, and the changing meaning of the American dream. Today, I want to stay within the theme of American culture, but approach it from a completely different perspective. Instead of talking about dreams, I want to talk about appearance. More specifically, I want to ask this question. Why do people seem so comfortable being themselves in many parts of the United States? Before I begin, I want to make something clear. This episode is not about judging culture. It's simply based on my own observations after spending 3 different summers in the United States. During those visits, I had the opportunity to travel extensively. Instead of staying in one city, we went on long road trips across different states, and something gradually caught my attention. Outside of places like New York City, many people seemed surprisingly relaxed about how they looked. People went to grocery stores wearing comfortable clothes. They wore little or no makeup. Hair didn't always look perfectly styled. People did not seem overly concerned about looking polished every time they stepped outside. At first, this surprised me because I realized I had unconsciously expected something different. Coming from a different cultural background, I was used to seeing a public appearance as something people paid close attention to. But after spending more time there, I started asking myself a different question. What if this wasn't about appearance at all? What if it was actually about freedom? One of the most interesting things about culture is that we often mistake our own habits for universal truths, right? We assume that the way people dress, speak, behave, or present themselves is simply normal. But what feels normal in one society can feel completely different in another. This is exactly why traveling is so valuable. It allows us to notice assumptions we didn't know even we had. The more I traveled across the United States, the more I noticed that many communities seem to place less emphasis on constantly performing perfection. Of course, there are exceptions. Cities like New York or Los Angeles have their own cultural dynamics. Fashion, media, and professional environments naturally influence how people present themselves. But outside those spaces, I often sense something different. People appeared more comfortable with being ordinary, and I actually found that refreshing. As someone interested in cultural studies, I started wondering why. One possible answer is individualism. American culture has long valued the idea that people should be free to express themselves. Of course, reality is always more complicated than cultural ideals. But in everyday life, I often felt that people were less concerned about whether strangers approved of their appearance. Instead, comfort seemed to matter more. Function seemed to matter more. This made me reflect on another question. How much of our appearance is actually for ourselves? And how much is shaped by the expectations of other people? Sociologists have asked this question for decades. The way we dress is never just personal, it is also cultural. It communicates belonging, identity, profession, social class, gender, even values. Every society develops visible and invisible expectations about what is considered appropriate. Sometimes we follow those expectations without realizing it. One thing I appreciated during my travels was seeing people of different ages simply living in their lives without constantly appearing to perform for others. Parents walking in comfortable clothes, older people enjoying parks without worrying about fashion, students going to cafes exactly as they were. It reminded me that confidence does not always come from looking perfect. Sometimes confidence comes from no longer needing to prove anything. And I think that is an interesting cultural lesson. Not because one culture is better than another, but because different cultures remind us that there is more than one way to live. Traveling teaches us that our habits are not universal. They are simply one possibility among many. Perhaps that is why I enjoy studying culture so much. It constantly reminds me that ordinary moments often reveal extraordinary ideas. A walking through a supermarket, a conversation in a coffee shop, a long drive across different states. These experiences become opportunities to understand culture in ways that statistics never can. So maybe today's question is not whether Americans care less about appearance. Maybe the better question is this: how does every culture teach us what is worth caring about? And perhaps even more importantly, which of those expectations truly belong to us? Thank you so much for joining for another episode of Cultural American Cultural Myths. I would love to hear your experiences. Have you ever traveled somewhere that completely changed the way you thought about everyday life? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.